but the kingdom of God revealed through the Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. Ideals, energy, goodness, justice comes to the world through this vehicle of a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, that the Jewish people, the gift, God's gift to the world, to have a heart, have this soul in the midst of humanity, to bring otherworldly, divine ideals. So we spoke about the kingdom being Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. So I wanted to bring in the context of what the Ramban has, mitzvah number 4, the counting of the 613 mitzvot that we have from the Torah. Nachmanides, among others, the Rambam counts to 613, and the Ramban, Nachmanides, places where he differs, he adds or subtracts. Because if you have 613, if you include one mitzvah, then another mitzvah isn't included. You have to. There's a lot of mitzvah. There's more than 613. But how do you count the 613? So the Ramban has a few places where he differs with the count of the 613. And number 4 is what I'll read to you. Again, it's in small Rashi print. So I'll just read it to you. I don't think you can read it so much. For those who want the sheet to believe it that it's written. So it says like this. I think I have part of it in English. It says, it's a positive commandment to inherit the land of Israel that God gave the Jewish people to our fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And he says, how does he define the mitzvah? That the land should not be left in the hands of others, in the hands of other nations, or to be desolate, to be left desolate. So we mentioned, I think last week quickly, what does it mean? How do you define that the land should not be in the hands of others? Put someone in the hands. But what does it mean?
Possession.
Possession. How does a nation possess? What's that called?
Sovereignty.
Jewish sovereignty. The land should be in the Jewish sovereignty and not in the hands of others, not under foreign rule. That's the commandment. The commandment is, it's in the book of Bamidbar, we'll get to soon in the few weeks, how you should inherit the land and settle therein. So the Ramban says that the mitzvah, but there's 2 things he says here: not to leave it in the hands of other nations. It has to be, you have to have an independent state in the land of Israel, or not to leave it desolate. You might think that you can live, like I said, set up even army here, put up a flag, and then go live in Florida. But no, there's a part of the commandment to develop the land. Because that's what it says in the Torah. The source of this commandment is Vorashtem et haaretz v'yishavtem ba. You shall settle the land. You shall inherit the land. It should be your inheritance, your possession. V'yishavtem ba, yishuv. It should be developed. You should bring out the fruit, like the Chatam Sofer writes. The holy fruit is the land of Israel. That's part of the commandment, to be in the land of Israel, to develop the economy and the society, but first and foremost, the agricultural, the development of the land. So in other words, the mitzvah, there's a positive commandment to have Jewish sovereignty, which also the Rambam writes. The first commandment upon entering the land of Israel, the Rambam has what is called the laws of kings and their wars. In chapter 1, he writes, there's a positive commandment to appoint a king, to have a kingdom. To appoint to have a king. We mentioned last week the kingdom, what kind of that? Democracy, a monarchy. There's different aspects, different variant. But ultimately there will be the return to the kingdom of David, the dynasty of the house of David. But other forms, we said how different forms of Jewish sovereignty is considered the fulfillment of this mitzvah, as opposed to individuals that make aliyah is also a mitzvah to be in Eretz Yisrael, as we'll see. But that's, again, a branch of the collective commandment, to have it under your control. If one Jew comes here during the exile, who didn't have control, so he fulfills a certain aspect of the mitzvah, but he can't, it's not under his control, it's not in his hands. The state, the land, so that is not the complete fulfillment. In 1948, in Tashach, 5708, we entered a new dimension, as we saw the Rambam, with the days of the Mashiach. That's why we brought the context of this, on the sheet which you saw last week. The Rambam writes in a few places, when is the days of the Mashiach? Is when the kingdom returns to Israel. Jewish sovereignty enters a new era of the messianic era, of the divine vehicle being now. There's a collective embodiment that enables this spiritual good and holiness and names of God to be revealed in the world, of a kingdom that is holy, not just holy individuals. Non-Jews can be holy, righteous individuals, and moral and ethical. And individual Jews can be the opposite, unfortunately. But the kingdom of priests, it says, you'll be unto me a kingdom of priests and holy nation. A nation that shows holiness, goodness, that is the collective drive of life to make up society, that drives governmental institutions and then offices, is driven by this good, the divine good of goodness, of charity, of giving, of loving, of caring, of chesed, I say charity, and then tzedek, justice. A nation, that's the neshama, the soul of this nation is not a collective egoism. It's the bring down that good to all on the national level, which we said is more encompassing. Individuals can be holy in their private sphere, but to be a nation of holiness, that all is holy, government, army, politics, agriculture, industry, and all that is run by and driven by and reveals goodness on this collective. That's the more holistic totality of God's name, of the full truth of justice that is revealed in the world through the Jewish people, the whole Jewish nation. That's why we said the Messianic era is on the Gemara and Brachot, but the Rambam brings down that in the days of the Mashiach, the world continues as it is. No miraculous phenomenon, no miracle. So where's the Mashiach? The Messianic era is when the Malchut Tachzor, when the kingdom returns to Israel. So that we mentioned last time. But now, therefore, this is the mitzvah. The significance of the mitzvah, nevertheless, the dry law, so to speak, is that the Jewish control over the land of Israel and to develop the land. And he defines, he says, the borders of where this applies. And then I'm just skipping down. He says, you might think that this commandment is when the time of the Beit HaMikdash, or when the Jews left Egypt. Ramban says here, Haaretz lo naniach otam, we should not leave in their hands of other nations, velo biyad zulatam min ha'omot, bedor min hadorot, in all the generations. It's not limited in time, a certain time. When Moshe Rabbeinu commanded us in Bamidbar to come to the land of Israel, leave Egypt, and then you have a commandment to go. He says, no, this is from Ador bin Adorot, all the generations. Oh, there's a positive commandment to come and have the sovereignty, whatever you can. We didn't have the means. Rav Kook used to tell us, Rav Yehuda Kook, how in Europe they didn't have, Russia, whatever, they didn't have the four species on Sukkot. We don't have an etrog, you can't do the mitzvah. For 2,000 years, we didn't have the guns, the weapons, the means to defend and to become an independent state. You can't do the mitzvah. It's obligation. But unfortunately, we couldn't fulfill it. Now, it's been fulfilled. And Baruch Hashem, we have the ability, and done so, to be in our hands. But this applies in not just one generation, at certain times, but in all the generations. And later repeats it. Again, I'm skipping here, but we are commanded to conquer in all the generations. And then later, mitzvah taseh ledorot. This is a positive commandment for generations. Mitchayev kol echad, obligated each one of us, afilu bizman hagalut, even in the time of exile. So here he talks about the individual mitzvah. Time of exile is the opposite of Jewish sovereignty. That's what exile means. You don't have a Jewish control of the land of Israel. But even then, it applies the mitzvah, the obligatory command to be in the land of Israel on each one of us, even in time of exile. Even when you can't fulfill the bigger mitzvah, you can say, okay, so now I can stay in America. We don't have a state. So I'll stay here, wait till we have a state. I'm not here. The Ramban says it's a positive commandment, generations, eternally. Obligated, because there's some that say it's an optional mitzvah. That if you come, definitely it's a big commandment, a big reward, it's a big merit to be in the land of Israel. But it's not obligation. We have some commandments that are called optional. If you build a house, you have to. If you want to go up on the roof, you have to build a parapet. You have to build a gate on the roof so people shouldn't fall off. If you want to go up on the roof, it's not an obligatory mitzvah. You don't have to build a house and go up and make a roof. Right? No, but to build the what's it called, penthouse, whatever. And to build, if you close it, if you have a roof, you don't have to build a fence. Only if you go up on the roof, you make a. So no, there are mitzvot that are optional, so to speak. But here, the Ramban uses the wording of mitchayev, obligatory. This is the positive commandment one obligated to do, like putting on tefillin every day. It's not an option. I'll do once a week, once a day. Here, the obligation is every day. This is a positive commandment. So too, the commandment upon each of us, even when we can't capture the land, individually you can't conquer the land, even the time of the exile. And then he ends up with what the rabbis bring down, the source, that Yeshivat Eretz Yisrael, the settling, the commandment to be in Eretz Yisrael, Shekula is equal, it's hard to define it, equal, weighs as much as all the mitzvot in the Torah. It's not in place of all the mitzvot. You can be here and it doesn't matter what you do as far as you don't have to keep the other mitzvot, God forbid. But it has the same weight, meaning it's the foundation of all the mitzvot. This is the place where all the mitzvot were meant to be, as we saw. Remember, we went in the book of Dvarim over and over again. These are the statutes and laws you should keep in the land that I'm going to give you. Over and over again, right? The book of Dvarim, chapters 5 and 6 and 11, 12. These are the statutes and the laws I'm teaching you to keep in the land, ba'aretz, that I'm giving you. So much so that the rabbi said that the mitzvot outside the land are, you should continue doing the mitzvot outside the land, so they shouldn't be new to you when you come back to Eretz Yisrael. You have it here. That's in English, the Rashi there? No. In Spanish? Portuguese. So Rashi brings down on what we say every day in Kriyat Shema, that you'll be kicked off the land, and you should keep putting on the tefillin and the mitzvot, etc. So the rabbis on that say that you should continue doing the mitzvot even outside the land, so they shouldn't be new to you when you come back. It's like at the rehearsal. A rehearsal for the real thing. The real thing is in Eretz Yisrael. The full-blown metaphysical sort of influence and radiation that comes to the world, this blessing that comes to the world through the commandments, is in Eretz Yisrael. But the law is that commandments even outside, the commandments of the body, Shabbat, Kashrut, or the Tefillin, applies in the land of Israel, the Gemara says in Kiddushin, the Mishnah, in the Eretz Yisrael, and even outside the land. There are certain mitzvot that depend only on the land, Trumot and Masrot, the tithes and then Shemitah, Yovel. Those are pertinent, only apply to the land of Israel. But Shabbat, Kashrut, Tefillin, that's, the Gemara said, that applies to, it's obligatory even outside the land, from the Torah. But the rabbis say, yes, it's an obligation from the Torah to put on tefillin in New York. Where are you from? Cincinnati? What? Ohio. So even there's an obligation from the Torah. But the rabbis say, why? Well, the question is because the Torah over and over emphasizes these are the mitzvot you should keep in the land of Israel. This is the place. So, as if they're answering the question, so why keep the mitzvot outside the land? The Torah says you have to keep them. It's not a voluntary rehearsal, but it's a rehearsal for the real thing, the full influence, the full obligation, so to speak, with this great influence, is in the land of Israel. They say in the name of Chafetz Chaim says that the mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael is worth 20 times the fulfillment of the mitzvah outside the land. But nevertheless, the rabbis say, and again Rashi brings it down in the Chumah, all the commentators, Rashi, Ramban, it's from the Sifri, the Midrash Halacha, the rabbis at the time of the Mishnah Gemara, Tanaim, Mishnah, that, I think it's brought down here, that one can keep the mitzvot even outside the land, so they shouldn't be new to you when you come back. It's in Bamidbar. I think 11 verse 18. But there's the Sifri that the Ramban quotes here. I'll read it to you in English. Later I'll show you what the sources I'm reading. But from the Sifri, again, the Midrash Halacha, on that verse he says you should drive them out and dwell in their land. So the rabbis, it says once these rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tera, Matya ben Charash, Rabbi Chanina, and Rabbi Yochanan, they were leaving the land of Israel. They were going to do some mitzvah. One says to Pidyon Shvuim, they came out to release some prisoners, or others, when they were leaving the land. They reached Paltum, a place in Chutzlah. They reached the border and remembered Eretz Yisrael. They go, what are we doing? We're leaving Eretz Yisrael. They lifted their eyes, their tears began to flow. They tore their garments, and they read the verse, you shall drive them out and dwell in the land. Then they returned to their place. They didn't continue. They went back to Eretz Yisrael, and they said, and this is the statement that the Ramban quotes, dwelling in Eretz Yisrael is equal to all the mitzvot of the Torah. Another story, the same thing. Rabbi Elazar ben Shamu and Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar were walking in the Tzivim to go and learn Torah under Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera at Chutzlar, outside the land. They reached Sidon and remembered Eretz Yisrael. They lifted their eyes, the tears began to flow. And they read this verse, you shall drive them out. Then they returned to their place and said, dwelling in Eretz Yisrael is equal to all the mitzvot of the Torah. And here we see that it's the mitzvah of all the generations, because the time that these Tanaim were living was after the destruction of the Second Temple. Right? These rabbis had said we have to remember the land. How can we leave the land? There's a commandment to live in the land of Israel. It's equal to all the mitzvot of the Torah, even at that time when there was no temple. The temple was destroyed. Anyway, the Ramban so brings this down for the halakha. There are others You could say, well, today there are a few, or there have been throughout history, people that try to excuse themselves from this mitzvah, saying it doesn't apply today, or it's not relevant, or it's difficult, or there was those that went even further that said it's forbidden to come to the land of Israel. We have to wait for the Mashiach. This book, again, it's translated from the Hebrew, "The Rise from the Dust," written by a friend of mine that was killed. Came from New York, came to Eretz Yisrael. Started learning, and he wrote down the obligation to come to Eretz Yisrael, the significance, and he brings down the first half of the book is the historical, you can say, overview of this phenomenon of the refusal to come to Eretz Yisrael and the price. We all know this week's parasha of the sin of the spies. Okay. That also, who were they? The low-life, small people, whatever. Oh, the Gedolim, the leakers, the righteous side, the tzaddikim, the righteous of the generation. 10 out of 12 said not to go to Eretz Yisrael. No, too hard, too difficult, we can't go. We don't have to go, we should stay here. For different reasons. And all the rabbis talking about different reasons. They had good reasons. We understand, we know that in the desert, the guidance of God was what we call miraculous. Food, we ate miraculous food, the man every day, in front of your house, in front of the water from the Miriam's well, going with them in the desert. All the miracles, living totally in face-to-face with God. There was no question, is there a God? It was total connection to the source of life, literally supernatural, divine guidance. In Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be what we call the natural, through human participation, human efforts to grow, to plant seeds, to harvest, to go to war, to defend yourselves against the enemies, the nations that are there. It's very difficult. And what happens when you start doing, I do, I succeed, I build, I do, and you forget the source, that it's all me, I'm doing, I'm strong. You forget that God is giving you the strength, like it says in Deuteronomy chapter 8, that God's giving you the strength to do all those things. But sometimes you forget, you're so successful that you do, and you can forget. Therefore, these rabbis, it said, let's stay in the desert. The price, the spiritual price we're paid to go to Eretz Yisrael will be this, it could be a spiritual falling, which indeed took place, that they'll forget God. They'll be doing, and we're working, and you, like people, it happens when you don't see the source anymore. In the desert, there's no question. The source was clear. We see the hand of God. So let's stay in the desert. Isn't that better? I think Rabbi Lubavitch also explains it this way, how to stay, therefore, that's how he explains the sin of the spies, I think, among others, that the spiritual decline that will take place if we go to Eretz Yisrael, when we now have to work in human participation. And this is the plague. We'll get back to that, hopefully, the sin of the spies, because it's relevant to this week's parasha. But he goes through this book how, from the beginning of history, even from Avram Avinu, that was told to go to Eretz Yisrael, and he hesitated, and he brings down the sources, how he was, the punishment, so to speak. He brings the Ramban, that he left Eretz Yisrael in the time of the famine. His departure from the land about which he had been commanded at first because of the famine was also a sin he committed, for God in famine will deliver from death. Because of this deed, his descendants were condemned to exile in Egypt for 400 years. Because the Ramban says, it's from the Zohar, he brings down, since Avram went down to Egypt without permission, his descendants were subjugated in Egypt for 400 years. So, but anyway, he starts with Avram Avinu, and throughout history, except for Yitzchak. Yitzchak was born in Eretz Yisrael, lived in Eretz Yisrael, died in Eretz Yisrael, never left Eretz Yisrael, the holy Yitzchak Avinu. But otherwise, he throws throughout history this repetition of this sin, of this forgetting about the centrality of the being in the land of Israel. And again, the price we paid each time for that. Ultimately, the the sin of the spies is the classic example. I said it before that. But even after that, since that, the sin of the spies, and as you know, that God, the sin of the golden calf, God forgave them. Moshe asked for forgiveness and he forgave them. The sin of the spies, when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, there was no forgiveness. All those that participated from the 20, right, 40, did not enter the land of Israel, were killed in the desert. But Moshe Rabbeinu said not to do it in a way that to be a desecration of God's name. That they'll see the Jews are dying. You said you could get out of Egypt, but you couldn't bring them into Eretz Yisrael. God, your God is too weak. So indeed, God said, okay, I won't kill them all at once, but they'll die. Right, every year they'll die until the age of those that participated. The next generation will enter the land of Israel. But he goes through that. Also, again, I'm not going to read the whole book. In the land of Israel, Migat Ruth, right, because of Machlon and Kilyon, died because the Gemara says in Bava Batra, because they left Eretz Yisrael. Right, at the time, again, it was famine, difficult times in the time of Ruth and Elimelech. Well, Ruth was later, but Elimelech was the leaders of the generation, the scholar of the generation, and he left. So the Gemara says, because he left Eretz Yisrael, he and his sons died. But he goes on through that, throughout history, up till today. The Jews of Yemen, the Jews of Persia, have all these traditions because they left. They didn't come back in the time of the Second Temple. When Ezra called them to come back, they refused to come back. They said, we don't have it good now. There's wars in Eretz Yisrael. We have it safe. We have it quiet. And Ezra and Nehemiah, Ezra told them, you won't have it so quiet for long. And indeed, they have these traditions, all the suffering they had. And then, as you know, the rest of history, up till this day, the Vilna Gaon writes how every generation has this repetition of the sin of the spies, refusal to come to Israel with different justifications. Spiritual, physical, it's hard, it's difficult, or more spiritual, like I said, we're worried about God's name, we're worried about the religiosity of the people, we don't want to come. It's more easy to be religious in New York here than, I don't know, where you are from, but I don't know, some places they think it's, but God says to come to Eretz Yisrael, and God knows that the difficulties and challenges, indeed it's more difficult to be religious, having a nation, being a kingdom, being in the physical world. It's easier in the desert, living in miracles in the cloud, but that's not Judaism. There was a point we had to, coming out of Egypt, the young fledgling nation, like a child, he's spoon-fed. God does everything for him, feeds them. The mother does everything. The child is totally dependent. But that's to build up and ultimately to stand on his own 2 feet, to come there to Israel, to be independent, and to stand and to live holiness and goodness and godliness in this world, with the physical, with all the difficulties and challenges. Indeed, those challenges come with the growing up. But that's the ideal, to sanctify God's name in this world, with the kingdom, with the nation, not just holy individuals to live in a monastery and run away from the world. That's not Judaism. Torah has the power, it's the divine energy and truth that can uplift all, and is meant to uplift all, and will uplift all. Not to run away from the physical, from the challenges. It's difficult, and challenges, not everyone stands up to the challenge. But ultimately the goal is to bring down God's name over all. What we say in the prayers, God is heaven and earth. Is physical and the spiritual and the physical, soul and body. God is one overall, not just the spiritual world and up is God, and this world is the devil. That's not the opposite of Judaism. That's why Christianity is idolatry, because it's like there's two rishuyot, it's called two dominions. There's God from here up, and the devil has control. The physical is evil, the original sin, the immaculate sin, whatever, that can't be fixed, man. The body is evil. You have to leave that as much as you can if you can be a monk and vows of celibacy, not to get married. But the Torah goal is because God is one. He created all, to use all, to be in all, live in this world with the body, but to live with properly. And indeed, it's more difficult. So the spy said, look, it's too much. Let's stay in the desert. Here we have it good and quiet and peaceful. But that's not the goal. It won't work, and it can't work. And we've seen he brings down throughout history that it won't work. You can't run away from this world. You won't succeed because that's... But he brings out very strong sources here, from the Torah sources and historical, what happened. The second half of the book is the halachic side of the obligation to come to the land of Israel. What I just read to you, the Ramban. In the Shulchan Aruch, you have here, if you can read Even Ezra, on the left, put your hand on that column there. Left, the second book on the right. Even Ezra, the second one on the right, I think. That one. No, next to Even Ezra. So this law, there's a law about, we mentioned a while ago, if you remember, from from the Gemara in Ketuvot, that one who can force his wife to go up to Eretz Yisrael, they want to make Aliyah. The wife says, no, I don't know the language. Anyway, she doesn't want to come. She can be forced up to come in order to fulfill this mitzvah. And the opposite, if the wife wants to make Aliyah, she comes to Israel and he says, no, whatever reason, I'm just making up. I can't come. I don't have a job. I don't know the language. Nevertheless, she can force him up. If not, she loses. She gets her ketuvah. In other words, he loses his. Whoever doesn't want to come is on the, as the bottom, loses out. Either she loses her marriage contract, her marital rights, and the obligation, or vice versa. It's not like it's one side. Both. If she wants to come, but that's all based on, the rabbis say, the Ran and the Rabbi, based on the fact that the mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore to come. So this is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. It says one, and we remember from the Gemara that we read, that one can force his wife up, or husband up, to a worse climate from a better climate. She said, look, in Florida, or vice versa. Again, the husband, she wants to make Aliyah. He says, look, I like in Florida, I like the climate, I like all the... and usually from one place to another, you can't force the couple to a worse place, to a worse climate physically and spiritually. That's within Eretz Yisrael or within America, so to speak. But from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara said that one can force his wife up to even a place that is worth, the surroundings, climate-wise, or even a city which is, if they were coming from a city full of Jews to a city full of non-Jews, idol worshippers. Remember the Gemara we spoke? So that's not just the Gemara, that's the Gemara, but also the Halacha. That's the final law. This is the Shulchan Aruch that you brought me. In Siman Ayin Hey, 75. It says usually you can't go from a Neveah to a better climate to a worse climate, etc., etc. However, or a place full of Jews, you can't take her out from a place that's Jewish, or a Jewish surrounding, Jewish community, to Makom Sherubo Akko, that are the idol worshippers or non-Jews. But that's from Chutz La'aretz to Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. But to Eretz Yisrael, you go up even from a good place, a better climate, to worse. From what he said before about the temperature here. But even if it's a worse climate or worse surroundings, even a city which is majority Jewish, they have some places in New York, Square Town, New Square, whatever, that's Muncie, a lot of Jews. Even from there to a place to Eretz Yisrael full of non-Jews. And so you might think, that's the Shulchan Aruch, but what about the different... So we have what's called the Pitchei Tshuva. The Shulchan Aruch, there's different commentaries and different sources from the time of the Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and edited all the laws up to his day. But since then, there's more application and more laws and more. So then the Pitchei Tshuva is like the summary of, till that day, his day, in the Shulchan Aruch. What does he write? In letter number 6, there's a question: if today, Bizman Hazeh, is there a mitzvah to come to Eretz Yisrael? There's still those that say maybe we don't have to come, not obligatory, not.
Well, this day it says there, it's those days or this day, the modern time?
No, Bizman Hazeh means in our times, when there's no Beit HaMikdash, when there's no Jewish sovereignty. He's talking about the time of the Shulchan Aruch, the Pitchei Tshuva, written in Chutz La'aretz.
But we learned that the Rambam says we have to have sovereignty in the land.
Right.
All the time, so what the Gemara is asking.
No. The commandment on the individual is the individual commanded to come to Eretz Yisrael even when there's no state, there's no Jewish sovereignty. You're right, the Ramban said, that's what we'll get to in a second. The Ramban said this is obligatory commandment in all generations, obliged every one of us, even in the time of the exile. You're right, he answered the question, but he proposes it, so to speak. He says, look in the source, the question not he asks it, regarding the issue of if in our days, today, when we don't have today we have even more, we have the state of Israel. But the time when this is Pitchei Tshuva, summarizing all the laws up till his day. So look in the Me'il Tzedakah, there was a case about 3 people that wanted to make Aliyah, them and their children, and the court in their city told them they don't have to, because it's dangerous for the children. the boats. They won't be able to stand the tsar of the Tiltul. In those days, in the boats, whatever, the pirates in the boats, and the difficulties in the road, not the road, the sea passage is so difficult the children won't make it alive. So then you don't have to come. And they asked this rabbi, debating here, the rabbis in their city told them not to go. So these people asked this greater rabbi, the Il Tzedakah, one of the great halachic sources, and he answered them that today, regarding if it's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, we have the Ramban. The Ramban that I read to you, Nachmanides, that the mitzvah, though we have this positive commandment from the verse that says you shall inherit the land and settle therein, and it's equal to all the mitzvot in the Torah, like it says in the Sifri. He brings out the Trumat Hadeshin, tells how important the mitzvah is, and then he says, this is, and so too, all the times are equal. There's no difference of time of the temple, times of the statehood, times of, they're all equal, like you said. But that was his answer. First, the question was, do we listen? Not only that, do we listen, but this is the court. The Jewish court in their city told them they don't have to. But he comes and says, no, that all the times are equal to the fulfillment of the mitzvah. So too, it's clear from all the poskim, rishonim, and achronim. It says the name of all the rabbis. There are dissenting opinions. Maybe I'll read you a few. There's one or two. There are. It's not like 100%. But here, the halakha that the Pesach Jew brings down, this rabbi that says, no, all the poskim, all the halachic authorities agree with the Ramban, that agree that you force the woman up to go with her husband, and that's based on the obligation to come to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, they don't have to listen to the court. These are the problem of not listening to the court. But once the Jewish court says something, even if it's not a mitzvah, so to speak, it's something, but there's the deference to the going against the court decision. But here it says, no, the obligation to come to Eretz Yisrael supersedes that. The value you have to come to Eretz Yisrael because this mitzvah is like the Ramban says, and all the rabbis agree. So I said there are, if you see this book, you'll see he brings down the different opinions. There was a rabbi in America that said it's a great mitzvah, but it's what I called before the optional mitzvah. Indeed, if you come, it's a fantastic mitzvah. It's amazing.
Optional.
What?
When you say optional,
no, optional. What I said before, like if you build a roof, whatever. It's not obligatory. Obligatory means you have to do it. There's no. Optional means if you do it, it's a mitzvah. The truth is, tzitzit is one of those mitzvot. If you wear a four-cornered garment, you have to put on the tzitzit. Yeah. If you don't wear a four-cornered garment, there's no obligation to have tzitzit. We purposely buy and have and wear a four-cornered garment to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. But that's an optional, how do you say, strictly speaking, whatever, it's an optional mitzvah. Tefillin is not. You have to put on tefillin every day. Tzitzit, you don't have to. If you don't go out without a four-cornered garment, there's no obligation. The rabbis talk about how severe it is if you don't do it, whatever. It's optional, but it's problematic not to do so. So we purposely take upon ourselves make ourselves obligated by having the four-cornered garment. But the mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael is, he talks about here, again, the whole book is, I don't want to read the whole book. I suggest it's in English now. Those who agree with the Ramban, like he said, all the rabbis agree. The Sefer Charedim, Maharit, Il Tzedakah, Rabbi Yaakov Eden, the Chidach, Chacham Adam, Pater Shulchan, Chitam Sofer. He brings down, unbelievable, this child. He was killed he was murdered in Hebron on Shabbat. They were singing outside the near the Marach Matpelah, Beit Hadassah, and a few Arab gunmen shot them, opened fire and killed, I think, 5 of them that were dancing there. In 1980. He was very young, but he put together, he was so burning he went to all the rabbis to go to Israel, announce to the Jews in the world that they have to come to Eretz Yisrael. Don't leave it if the Jews hear a clear voice of all the rabbis, he went on to the rabbis. It's amazing what he managed to put together at such a young age. But like I said, you can see here he goes to all the sources, those that's in Megillat Esther, the opinion of the Rambam, if it's a positive commandment or not, or so again, he covers the topic which I don't have time for now, but I want to get to this thing about I've already mentioned the sin of the spies. of this week's parasha. So, like I said, one of the explanations is that the fear of spiritual falling upon entering the land of Israel. So let's stay safe. Let's stay away from the challenges. But again, God commanded. It's not like you. That's what the rabbis talk about. Those who it's not up to you to make accountings for the mitzvah. If I put on tefillin, maybe I'll do this. There are certain situations. In other words, someone is sick, you can't have the stomach. Certain things, but here you can't play the games with the thing. Make your intentions of what would be if I do this mitzvah. Maybe you'll have certain. You have the commandment. The Gemara says about someone who is king that didn't want to do the mitzvah, didn't want to have children, because the prophet said maybe you'll have children that aren't so good, aren't religious. So he said, I won't have children. So the prophet came to him and said, don't make the divine accounting. You have the obligation. You can't make the accounts of what will be. But nevertheless, when it comes to this mitzvah, he shows here throughout history, on every other mitzvah, he brings Yaakov Emden, also how on this mitzvah there's a certain weakness. Other commandments, they're meticulous. Every Jew, religious people command every commandment. We're meticulous and do every detail properly. When it comes to this commandment, all of a sudden there's this blackout. There's this phenomenon again throughout history, and not just the small people that aren't. Through the leaders, the Spin of the Spies being the classic example of the giants, like you said, the giants, the rabbi. The Midrash says they were tzaddikim that turned evil because of this. They were the top of the generation, the leaders. But when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, it has this power to blind. The Vilna Gaon writes, I said, every generation has this phenomenon of the repetition of the sin, of the lack of, I don't want to say desire, but even more than that, the avoiding the commandment of coming to Eretz Yisrael. And he says that it's through the righteous people, often, and they don't even realize that they're being trapped by the sin of the spies, that they are enthralled, what's the word in English, that they are fallen into the sin of the spies.
So it's like history repeats itself nowadays.
Okay. He says, especially the time of the redemption. The time of the redemption is this more, I'll read you what he writes, this is Eimani Smecha. He brings down from Eliyahu Gutmacher. He says, we must initiate the process of redeeming the land, not to wait for Hashem, what we have to do, although we can do, and then Hashem will complete it. One must understand the great importance of this matter, for the evil forces gain strength, the klipa, even among the most righteous individuals in order to nullify this good. This is so because this negative force is so, the strength depends on exile. When the exile dissolves, so will these forces of evil. So for these forces of evil, let's call it, try to prevent the Jews from coming back to Israel. And these forces that we see today, affecting the nations from without, to try to hold us from coming back to Israel, and also from within, the Jewish people. This repetition of the spies. As C. Fishman writes, how when Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jews, let my people go. Now in America, he says there's more let my people stay. That they're fighting anti-Semitism. On the campuses, anti-Semitism. So they're trying to fight that anti-Semitism. Let us stay here in America. Get rid of the anti-Semitism. Let us be free. Let us have rights. Let us stay. Let my people stay. Instead of realizing. So he's writing this, Rav Tachtal, Zatzal, Hashem Yikom Damo, that was killed in the Holocaust. But he's writing how all these things that are, the beatings that we're getting are because of the fact that we're not waking up and coming to Israel. And he himself, as he mentions, that he was not a Zionist. He was raised as also told that Zionism is evil and wrong. We have to wait for God to bring the redemption. But he writes how now all these things that are taking place, all these persecutions, whatever, the pangs of the Mashiach knocking and calling us and reminding us to come back to Israel. The whole book is about that. But I want to read you, just in the context of the days of what he calls here, this section, the modern day spies. Because there are those that, 2 minutes, there are those that oppose this undertaking of the Jews building the land of Israel. Not only did they oppose it but they caused the simple Orthodox Jews to despise the rebuilding of the land. That if someone gets excited about Zionism, whatever, they say, oh, you're a Zionist, you're an abhorrence, you're an abomination. Like you're a Zionist, that's like idol worshiping. Idol worshiping, like this poster in the certain community here, Judaism and Zionism are diametrically opposed. Unfortunately, they still exist. This misconception, but I have to understand why, etc. But this phenomenon of the sin of the spies. So these people were told that, you're Zionist, you're not Jewish anymore. It's either Israel, the Zionism, nationalism or religion, not realizing how the total phenomenon of Judaism, of Torah, is fulfilled dafka by the Jewish people that stayed in the land of Israel. But because it was happening throughout history in the exile, how these two forces separated, the nationalism and the national, physical side and the spiritual side became two opposing forces, especially in Hungary, where he was from. Those that woke up to have this feeling to go back to the land of Israel, that God infuses us with the time of the redemption. We're infused with that new spirit, like it says in Yechezkel, I put a new spirit of life in you. You want to come back to the land of Israel, bring you home for my name's sake, and bring you home to fulfill that ideal of Jewish people in the land of Israel. So those that woke up to that, they were told, no, we're supposed to wait for the Mashiach. We have to wait for God. We have to not to do anything on our part. We have to. So the religious camp, so to speak, was against those who wanted to come up and build. And the more the religious were against the Zionists, so to speak, the more the Zionists became anti-religious. They said, Judaism is against Zionism, so keep your Judaism and keep your Torah. I want to go and be part of Israel. Or, like some people said, no, if the rabbis are against, I won't. I'll stay in Israel. I stay in Europe. But he said, this way these zealots spread hatred and enmity throughout the Orthodox world against the group which devoted itself to building our land. As a consequence, they also caused the desirable land to be despised. That's the verse, as we'll see, he brings from Tilim. They became entrapped in the sin of the spies, about whom it says they murmured, Tilim 106, they murmured in their tents, right, complaining. They despised the desirable land. Eretz Yisrael is the desirable land, Eretz Chemda. They caused the despising of Eretz Yisrael. They despised the land. That's the sin of the spies, with the Tilim in 106. What was the result of the spies? They caused everlasting sorrow. Today's spies, this is 1940, he was killed in 1945 in January, but he wrote this during the Holocaust. He says, today's spies as well have added sorrow unto sorrow, bringing us to our present situation in which we see horror after horror and weeping after weeping in the house of Israel. All of this has occurred because we despise the desirable land, as I will prove later on from the words of our sages. Later he also writes a different explanation, which I just in the last minute of. Therefore, he talks about how those who have a predisposition on this matter, about Eretz Yisrael, will not see the truth, will not concede to our words. All the evidence in the world will not affect them. Now, those who are, so to speak, anti-Zionist or don't want to, I can bring all the sources in this book in the world will not convince them. You have a predisposed position, all like the mind sees things like the optical illusions. You see how you're used to seeing things. You bring a source, no, doesn't mean what you see. I can bring examples of that. But nevertheless, those who don't want to see the truth won't see it with all the proofs I'll bring you. All the evidence in the world will not affect them, for they are smitten with blindness, and their inner biases cause them to deny even things which are as clear as day. Who amongst us is greater than the spies? The Torah testified that they were they were giants of they're tzaddikim. Nonetheless, since they were influenced by their desire for their authority, look what his reason he explains. They desired their authority, and therefore they rejected the desirable land and led others astray, causing this bitter exile to continue. Yeshua and Caleb began to argue with them and attempted to prove them. They brought arguments, etc. Nevertheless, they were unable to. The same holds true in our times. Listen to what he writes. It wouldn't be even when among rabbis, rebbes, and chassidim. This one has a good rabbinical position. This one is an established admor. This one has a profitable business or factory or a prestigious job which provides great satisfaction. They are afraid that their status will decline if they go to Eretz Yisrael. People of this sort are influenced by their deep-rooted selfish motives to such extent that they themselves do not realize that their prejudice speaks on their behalf. He brings down if it said also the Zohar and the Shla Kadosh, explain that the spies were afraid that they would lose their positions of leadership upon entering Eretz Yisrael, and so to the path of the just, chapter 11. That's not what I explained to you before, although it's connected. They were afraid of the spiritual decline, but it's connected to that. When you go to Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be more the physical building and doing in the army. Who's going to be the heroes of the society?
The army? Right,
the chief of staff, the strong, whatever. The rabbis, now it's successful, the movie star, whatever, the guys who are, so they were afraid, not because they were afraid, I want to learn how to say merit, that it's not because they're afraid of their position that we're not going to be as important, but who will be? In other words, the Torah will lose its stature, not because I won't be the leader. I won't be the leader, but why? Because other ideals will be the dominant forms when we go to Eretz Yisrael, and the Torah will lose its stature. Although, again, these rabbis said explicitly, and he says explicitly, the Rebbe will lose your admor. But nevertheless, without criticism, so to speak, we can understand it even on a deeper level, that it emanates from the fear of godliness, of the holiness that will be in Eretz Yisrael. They're afraid that the other factors will be more dominant and the spiritual side will be less. The truth is to finish up, that the fact that man has to participate and work through natural means doesn't mean God isn't there. God works and helps us now, but he does for us just like he did in the desert, but now it's through human participation. We mentioned the Radak, that God does it, he saves you, he redeems you, he does everything, but he does it, who Yisovavena Alidei Ben Adam, the Radak in Tehillim 143, that he does it through human effort, through you. You're the human agents. So God doesn't, it doesn't left, it's now, it was God up till now in the desert, and now it's all man. No, it's still God, but then it was God and only God. Now it's God working through you. So it's not if you understand properly, that our human effect is just to do the minimum that we're supposed to do, that God commands us to do. And then he said in the book of, in the Dvarim, that God's blessing will come through you, through your efforts. It's God's blessing. You'll succeed, but God wants you to do just open up the valve, open up a little bit, and then God, the blessing will be forthcoming, like he said before, that we have to initiate, like also throughout this book he says, we have to initiate and do, and then God's blessing will come, but not without that. He brings out others. I thought we can't go. Maybe next time we'll continue. I don't want you to miss it.